workforce research. So it's really nice to have a break from workforce research to do something different. And so I'm recently a semi-qualified expert on dog waste. So I spent the last 6 weeks or so reading everything I could get my hands on, talking to people, and just trying to separate the wheat from the chaff kind of thing, to figure like what's important to know here. And there's just a lot of stuff out there, a lot of different campaigns. So let me walk you through my research. Oh, and let me introduce you to my husband, Fred Sivian, who's here because he is recently retired. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Fred Sivian. I worked for Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection for decades. Lately, I was a stormwater coordinator for Massachusetts, helping larger and middle-sized Massachusetts towns meet the requirements for cleaning up their stormwater discharges to local rivers and streams. So I was advising Jan
on the presentation, right?
Oh, that's it.
Thank you.
So he was responsible, he knows all about the MS4 permit, which you'll hear a little bit about from me. And you can know that came from Fred. And if you have questions about that, he's glad to answer them. So let me share my screen and we'll talk about dog waste. Okay. So I just want to give you an overview of what I'm covering today. I'll talk briefly about the problem and some research on dog behavior and owner behavior, and a little bit about assessment. There isn't a lot of assessment out there, but I'm going to tell you what I uncovered. And then talk kind of more generally, I'll touch on waste reduction campaigns that I found out about. I want to talk a little bit about partnerships because there are 2 local groups that are very interested in this topic and available to work with you and excited to work with you. And that's Earthwise Aware, and the Middlesex Fells folks know very well who they are as they're doing a project up there, and also the Ponset River Watershed Association. Some takeaways that I have from reading and digesting all of this information, and then getting into some options for Blue Hills. And then we'll spend most of the time, I hope, on question and answer and discussion. So let's just jump into the problem, which I'm sure you're well aware of in its many forms. So the problem with dog waste is it's a pollutant. And the related problem is a lot of people don't know it's a pollutant. But it's a pollutant. It creates a nutrient problem for waterways, and it's a bacterial problem for drinking water. And people don't know this. They think that dog waste is just like any kind of wild animal waste, and so they don't kind of realize the issues that are associated with leaving dog waste behind. So a related issue, and this gets back to what Fred was feeding into my ear, was the federal incentive to reduce dog waste for these reasons of dog waste as a pollutant. There's a permit called the MS4 permit that requires, as Fred said, municipalities to address pollutants, and so consequently that generated a lot of activity on the part of various the departments of environmental protection and watershed associations and stormwater coalitions, et cetera, in dealing with this issue. So there is a lot of shared interest in this issue, and also a nudge from the federal government. So that's all to the good as it supports our cause. The other problem with dog waste, it's a nuisance. Everybody knows this. Nobody wants to see it, smell it, or step in it, and everybody recognizes that. So that's kind of not a problem. But what is a problem is owner knowledge about the pollution aspect of it and the behavior issues of owners. So we're gonna talk about that some more. A lot of what works in cities and towns and suburban neighborhoods is that people are walking their dogs. They'll be more responsible about dog waste in those areas because they're being observed. And a lot of the nuisance issues is picking up, because the nuisance issue is driven by a desire to be courteous. It's the right thing to pick up dog waste. So that kind of operates in more public environments, but in a trail environment, you have this added problem of, kind of the social norms don't necessarily apply because nobody's necessarily watching you. There's also the fact of off-leash dogs. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about off-leash dogs today. I mean, it's certainly a problem because they're defecating where owners don't see and can't get to it, and you don't want to encourage people to go off trail to get it, really. Off-leash dogs are a broader problem, and I know Middlesex Fells is dealing with this. It's a related problem, but I'm really going to talk about and focus on the dog waste issue today. Good research is hard to come by. There's lots of activity out there, lots of campaigns, lots of interest, and not a lot of measurement. And a lot of what's done is biased in a lot of ways. So I'll talk about that some more as we get to those studies. So let's talk about dog and owner behaviors. So if you want to know what percentage of dog owners pick up dog waste, it's hard to know from self-report studies, and there are a lot of them. People do surveys and, how often do you pick up dog waste? Well, guess what? People don't really want to tell you the truth because they know what the right answer is. This is called social desirability bias in the world that I come from in social science research. So people are going to tell you kind of what they think you want to hear. And if you're asking them face to face, they're certainly going to tell you that. There's a lot of bias in those kind of data, and maybe less so in a paper survey. There is some better research that has been done with random samples in watershed areas where whoever was sponsoring the study actually selected a random sample, and they were interested in understanding like what proportion of residents understood that fertilizers are a pollutant and oils are a pollutant and dog waste is a pollutant. So there's some better studies, but again, these all have challenges of some bias. But there is an interesting study that was done in 2019 in Boulder, Colorado, where they actually did observation on a trail to see what proportion of dog walkers picked up after their dog. So this is kind of interesting. And they trained the people to unobtrusively observe. And I forget how many days they did this for, but this was in 2019. They observed 541 dog walkers. 102 of those dogs defecated, and what they discovered from kind of these observation is that 73% of owners bagged and removed the waste, and 14% bagged it and left it, and 13% did neither. So this is really kind of consistent actually with what they observed in this study and what people kind of say in these surveys that may or may not be so reliable, but there is some consistency here. And that's it, like 10 to 20% of people just aren't going to do it. They don't care. They're not going to pick up their dog waste. They're, no matter what you do, you're probably not going to convince them. But you do have this most people do pick it up. Some people unfortunately leave it because they don't want to carry it. There's no place to dispose of it. And it just, kind of ends up bagged and on the trail. So when you ask people if, do they know, like, what do you think the pollutants are that contribute to pollution in waterways and waterways primarily, you'll get about 60 to 80% identifying that dog waste is a pollutant. So there is lack of knowledge out there that dog waste is a pollutant for sure. As I said, people don't really realize it. Now, one of the interesting things I came across in my reading is about dog behaviors. So one study reported another study. I couldn't get to the original studies, but so there was a statement in the study that dogs are most likely to defecate within the first quarter mile of a trailhead. So this is kind of an interesting fact and really helpful. Like if you're going to do an intervention, it helps you to know where to do it. Is really at trailheads, which is more convenient, of course. So I was speaking with Claire O'Neill, who is the executive director of Earthwise Aware, the Middlesex Fells Project, and I said, Claire, I ran across this finding is this true? Can you corroborate that this is true? And Claire, in her very animated way, if you have ever met her or heard her speak, said, yes, it's absolutely true. Let me show you. And she flipped over to her maps and said, look at these clusters of dog waste. She said, they're at trailheads. So she corroborated that statement. And I thought that was really interesting. So again, back to the research. If you ask people kind of what motivates them, like what are the biggest factors in your picking up your waste, then people will say it's a courtesy thing. They don't think other people should have to, see it or possibly step in it. And nobody wants to do that. Everybody kind of agrees with that. There are the social norms that, you're really supposed to pick up waste, just like you're not supposed to leave litter, you shouldn't leave waste. And there are the pollution concerns that we've been talking about. Now, what are when you ask people what are the hurdles to removing waste, to picking up and removing waste, and you ask that particularly of people who don't pick up waste, then they'll tell you that some people really believe that it's a natural fertilizer and it's okay to leave it. And other people think it's okay to leave it if it's somewhere where nobody's going to step in it, then it's kind of not a problem. So the courtesy argument goes away. And a lot of people say it's because they don't have a bag, or it's not convenient. There's no convenient waste bin. And, everybody forgets a waste bag every now and then. That just happens, but people kind of don't remember to bring them, or there aren't waste bins around. It's just not convenient. There's some proportion of people who just don't want to handle it. It's like the ick factor. It's like, I don't want to have anything to do with it. And off-leash dogs are a problem, of course. So I'm going to launch into the two studies that I found where there was measurement before and after a campaign. So that these are the two studies that I found. As I said, there's a lot of work that's being done out there as intervention campaigns. Not a lot of research on whether those campaigns are effective, whether they work, but I did find two that are kind of interesting. And it's just a shame that there are only two, around this topic. So this was in Kirkland, Washington, and this was just in 2020. And this was launched by the city, the DPW Water Division and related divisions, the Water Authority and the Parks and Rec and other city services. And they must have funded it really well. They were very much interested in understanding the effect of dog waste in local waterways. There are streams and lots of streams in the area. And so they did collect pre and post samples from the streams to check for phosphates and for bacteria. So there was that part of the project. And they also counted uncollected waste to measure the effectiveness of the campaign. So what did they do? They picked two city parks. They put up lots of signage. They put up new waste stations. They had waste bags available. And then what they did at the beginning of the campaign is that, and during the campaign as well, is they counted the waste left behind. And where waste was left behind, they put a flag. So at the beginning of this process, when they counted them and then they removed them and replaced them with flags, there was quite an impression made by all these yellow flags stuck in the ground. People, walking by and they say, what are those yellow flags? And you can see there's this big sign that educates them on what the yellow flags are. So, but in addition to this very kind of visual and specific intervention, as I said, they also put waste stations and waste bags in these locations where they were putting these flags. The other thing they did is they had a massive media campaign. Again, all the resources of the town were brought to bear on this. They had direct mail newsletters, they had postcards, they had info booths and events, and the press was involved. And so it was quite an extensive campaign. They did a drive for Super Scooper pledge. So basically, if you could get people to go online and sign a Super Scooper pledge that they were always going to pick up their dog waste, this helps, kind of imprint in people that this should be a regular thing that they do. So this was the massive campaign, and the results were that, unfortunately, they didn't find an effect in the waterways, and that was kind of riddled with other measurement issues around rain and when they were collecting samples. So there was no effect there, but there was an effect of waste decrease, a huge effect of waste decrease. It decreased by 80% pre and post campaign. And there are lots of those bags that ended up in the waste station. They removed a lot of dog waste bags from those stations that they had installed. And they say that the results were sustained for at least 2 months after that campaign. So they're very keen in recommending that the flagging. They think that, it's really a quite an impressive and effective message to get the image across to people that, like waste was, has been left in all of these places, and this is a problem, and of course educates them about why. So I'm going to move on to the next study, which was done at a trailhead, and this was in Boulder, Colorado, a very long time ago in 2004, but it's an interesting study. The Office of Open Space and Mountain Parks conducted this study, and they did a pre and post measurement, and they did this campaign. And so what they had decided to do, they had already decided they wanted to do this 1+1 campaign where they would encourage people who already pick up dog waste to also pick up another pile of waste if they were to encounter it. So it's the 1+1 program. And here's the quote, from the study about why they did this. When I first looked at that, I thought, oh my God, they're just enabling bad behavior by having other people pick up waste. But basically they refer back to the numbers that I reported to you. Is there like 10 to 15% of people are just never going to pick up their waste. So let's just kind of accept that fact and see if we can enlist good citizens to pick up this waste. So they were saying that this effort acknowledges that a segment of the public is not likely to pick up after the pet and encourage other dog walkers to take responsibility for it. So anyway, they wanted to know if it worked. So what they did was they picked a trailhead, and close to the trailhead, they set up this area, this transect for study, where they mowed the lawn so they could measure the waste piles. They installed 2 trash cans and a bag dispenser, and they also set up an education that was staffed by, this is one of my favorite parts of this study, a volunteer organization called FIDOS, Friends Interested in Dogs and Open Space, which I think is a great acronym and you might want to adopt in some way. So anyway, they had this core of volunteers who helped do this education. And they had 3 signs that they were testing with this message about the 1+1. So what did they find? So let me tell you actually what they expected. They expected a short-term reduction in dog waste based on this, but they did not necessarily expect a medium-term reduction. And they certainly didn't expect a long-term reduction in dog waste. But in fact, when all the messaging went away, but I'm sure the bins stayed, they actually did find a long-term effect of this. So there was a 2/3 drop in dog litter piles during the treatment period, and it was still in evidence 3 weeks beyond treatment and long-term 6 months later. And in conversations with people at the education table, 91% were receptive to picking up more than their own dog's waste. And the graphic at the top with the smiling dog was the one that was the most popular. And I guess that's the signage that they went with going forward. So let me stop for a second. Anybody have any questions so far? I'm going to move on to basically the variety of campaigns that I came across.
In the first campaign, how important, you talked about a massive media campaign, direct mail, other media, social presumably. How important was that in building people's awareness versus the on-site efforts?
It's a really good question, and one doesn't really know. And the interesting thing is when we get to talking about these other kinds of campaigns, there is a lot of that kind of work. And in fact, a lot of the work that NEPRA's doing is around this. And I'll just foreshadow that and tell you, for example, NEPRA produces inserts that go with dog licenses. So when dog licenses go out, they go out with an informational brochure. So there's a lot of that kind of of social media and information campaign, but there is no assessment about how it operates, how effectively it operates separately from other things. And this is one of the things that bothers me about both of these pieces of research. Had there been, if they just put the dog bins there with signage and
Right.
bags, would that what would the result have been separate from this other campaign? I mean, these other campaigns, I think people believe they maybe work in the short run, but they probably have a small window of effectiveness. They may or may not work in the long run. I mean, for some people, they'll educate them about the pollution aspect, and that will hopefully kick in and result in long-term behavior. But for other things, like here are some of the other things that are going on. Thank you, Jim, for the segue into this. So here are some of the other things that are going on that are exactly that. Do you scoop the poop? Is Rhode Island DEP's project related to the MS4 permit? And there's a lot of informational stuff, and you go up on the website and you'll see, do you scoop the poop is the branding, and there's lots of information to go with that. Orlando, Florida, and some other places have used Stop the Pollution. Again, lots of information going out. Santa Cruz has, Judy circulated the picture of the sign that Fred and I saw, and we've seen it other places. There is no poop fairy. It has educational message on it. Others scoop the poop. So Dover, New Hampshire in 2007 did a really extensive campaign, all the kinds of things that Kirkland, Washington did, with logos and branding and ambassadors and a website. And they had, campaigns, and they had dog biscuits that they gave away with ribbons on them and brochures, and activities for kids, all sorts of stuff. In fact, they produce a 50-page manual that other people can use. I downloaded it, and I will send it along to whoever's interested. It's really pretty good and still, kind of relevant in a lot of ways, but all the things that you can do to raise awareness about dog waste. It's very clever and very good, and it's unclear really what the effectiveness is. So besides this educational component, supplies and disposal are often, part of the intervention. So just a couple of examples besides just kind of placing them all by themselves. In Cambridge, there was an MIT student who, I don't know if it was a student or a staff person, somebody affiliated with MIT got the idea to create a poop digester that would convert waste to methane to power a park light. And they actually created this, installed a Park Spark digester in a dog park in Cambridge. And so you bag the dog poop, you put it in a tube, and then you have to use the handle to turn the handle so it goes into the underground container, and the digester does its thing, produces methane, and powers the light in the dog park. So kind of a cool project. I don't know how old that is, and whether it's still around. So I came across research from Mississauga, Ontario, where they installed in-ground waste collectors. So there's a tube above ground, and it has a small inlet. You put the dog waste in a biodegradable bag in there, and it goes into an underground collector. And the city thought this was fabulously successful, and they were planning on installing many more of them. I can't imagine it's an inexpensive undertaking. Lots of places installed pet stations and signage. They did this in Maryland. They've probably done this, just in more places than we could count. Marin County just embarked on, they issued a white paper in 2020. They did a lot of the kinds of research that I was looking at too, and they went about installing lots more waste stations and some signage, designing signage. They have not done any measurement. They talked about doing measurement, but it's hard to do. I mean, it's just really hard to have the labor to do a pre and post measurement. So again, this is kind of the meat and potatoes. I think people think these are the most effective things to do, is to make it more convenient for people. And of course, there are shaming campaigns. You can threaten people with signs and put scolding with fines, and put, punitive scolding signage around to just, indicate that people are jerks if they don't clean up after their dog. And there's the extreme measure in a suburb of Madrid where they set up this ploy where observers were out in dog parks and other places. And if an owner didn't pick up the dog waste, they would go, be very friendly and meet the dog and the owner and really chat them up and find out things about them so that they could pick up the dog waste and return the dog waste in the mail to the offender. So that's pretty extreme measure. So, so this is the kind of intervention that you see out there. But as I say, much creativity, little assessment. I want to talk about partnerships because I said up at the beginning, there are lots of people who care about this issue, are interested in this issue and want to see something done about this issue. So, I think it's in everybody's interest to work together on this and share resources on it. DCR is interested in it. Of course, it's litter, it's trash, it's a pollutant. DP is interested with the MS4 permit. NEPR is interested in it. The stormwater coalitions, which exist all over the state, are interested. I'm going to talk about NEPR and Earthwise Aware a little bit more. Certainly, town park and recreation offices care, and there are many other organizations and sources where people can help get the word out if you wanted to do kind of a broader public awareness campaign. So pet stores, veterinary practices, hospitals, these people can all be allies and help get the word out about these issues. So let me talk quickly about Earthwise Aware. The Middlesex Fells folks may want to pipe in, but it's a citizen science campaign around the hazards of dog poop and littering in the reservation. And so they have set up a pretty sophisticated system where they have an app that they've designed for their citizen scientists who they've enlisted and trained to go out and catalog where they find piles of waste. And they have been mapping this at different times over the last couple of years, I guess. And it's as I said, it's a sophisticated system to the point where there's really a back end that catalogs and basically prevents duplication. So no dog pile will be counted twice because they have GPS location on it. So they do their best to avoid double counting dog waste piles and really cataloging kind of what's going on in the Fells about waste. Anybody from the Fells want to kind of weigh in, add anything to that?
Yeah, I'm one of the volunteers.
You're a citizen scientist.
Actually, Claire's kind of modified it over time. So in the past year or so, each of us has our own route that we do once a month. So she's actually used to be just opportunistic. You would just sort of take a picture when you saw one, and now you commit to doing your route once a month. So that has some level of, time series associated with it. And the app is brand new. It's just a few months old. And that actually works pretty well as far as I can tell. I guess Good. That's it. It's and Claire is passionate about it. And the data science, she's a data scientist, as she will tell you. And so she's pretty, focused on making this useful.
She's great. And she's offered you the app. So she's offered the app to Blue Hills if they are interested in using it too. So it was a great conversation with her. She is a passionate and energetic person. So that's great. Thanks, Jeff. So let me move on to NEPR right now. I had a conversation with their outreach director, Nancy Filer, who is very, it's funny, you get people talking about this issue and they're really excited to talk to you. And they'll talk at great length about it. People really care about it. They appreciate that it's a problem and it's a hard problem to solve. So NEPRA has been involved in this probably from the MS4 perspective for quite some time. And they work with the local stormwater coalitions as well. So they have been thinking about and working on this for some time, and they have a lot of educational material available. They have these educational inserts that I mentioned that go out with dog license, and Nancy knows for sure that Canton and Milton participate in that. I'm not sure how many other towns do, but for sure they are getting the word out to your most local residents in the Blue Hill via dog license renewal. So that's great. They have stickers, rack cards, social media campaigns, and she herself is a graphic designer and communication specialist. And she would be delighted. Oh, and this is their poop fairy. This is their version of the poop fairy, and their information is branded with "There is no poop fairy." There's no such thing as a poop fairy. So this is their version of the graphic, and she would be delighted to partner with the Blue Hills on a campaign around dog waste. She has offered her services and is at the ready if you want to use them. So my takeaways from all this are many. If you were thinking about a survey, I guess I would ask you to really think through what you expect to learn from a survey. There have been a lot of surveys done. As I said, there's a very strong social desirability bias, and I think enough of them have been done that you can learn from what's out there, and there's probably no need to replicate it. If you wanted to do a survey for other reasons, if you had other goals, if they were more around kind of user experience and user satisfaction, then that's another thing, and that can be done effectively. But if it were just around dog waste, I'm not sure that it's the best use of your time and resources. I think enough of that work's probably been done to inform what you might do next. And we know from that research that people say they're motivated by, courtesy messaging and reminders and the education about public health. The appeal to issues around public health and pollution education are appreciated. People don't know. Some people don't know. Some people can imagine it's a pollutant, but when you tell them literally the hazards in terms of the nutrient load and the bacterial load, then I think it's a big aha for some people and would be effective in the long run for those kinds of people. So there are lots of design out there already developed, and I have many more than I've described here, and I can pass on all the variety of messages that I've come across. And there's lots of opportunity for creativity, and you may want to have some social media splashy events. I could imagine doing something at the Trailside Museum that would be fun and interesting. You could give stickers to kids about picking up dog poop. You just hope that they don't end up on the ground, right? Like being part of the litter. You want to add to the litter in the park when you generate all this messaging. But there's a lot of opportunity to do that. And Nancy from NEPRA would be really interested in a campaign that reached out to vets and pet stores and get the messages out there. So if there were something that you wanted to brand and disseminate, she's certainly a partner in doing that. Now, waste bins and bags seem to be part of the most effective solutions when there's budget and staff obviously to do that, and we know that there are barriers to do that in your facilities, but not only do they create the convenience and the supplies for people to do the right thing, they're visible reminders. So again, signs come and go, brochures come and go, a waste bin is there. It's a constant reminder, like, oh yeah, and then people kind of remember where they are. So they may be a quarter mile, an eighth of a mile, a quarter mile up the trail, and their dog, decides to defecate. Then it's not so bad to double back if that's where it happens. So if you can find the resources for dog bins, then that's a great thing. If you can provide the bags, that's a great thing. They're going to get used. I would be surprised if they didn't get used. Let me just jump ahead to what Marin County did. These are the bins that they use. So you can see clearly it's not just a garbage can with a lid on it where people would put lots of litter in addition to dog waste. These are designed really to just take dog waste, and they have your messaging next to it and bags next to it. And you can see that they've used some different messaging in different places. So, you know, to the extent that you can make these available, I can't imagine they wouldn't have been used. Everything I have read suggests that they will be used. So one of my takeaways after reading all this is, as Jim brought up and we were talking about, these interventions often combine education with disposal options. So we don't really know. There's no good research on what the effect of an education campaign is, short-term and long-term, or what the effect necessarily of different messaging is just on its own without bags and disposal. It may be that, you know, bags and disposal are the key here. We really just don't have any way to know from what we've seen in the studies about whether education in and of itself would be effective and how long it would last. I do have my worries that it would have a short-term effect and maybe not a long-term effect. So for Blue Hills, what I think you want to talk about is what kind of a campaign do you want to do? Do you want to do some branding? You work with NEPA or work with somebody else? You may want to do a study, a pre-post measurement study as part of your campaign and figure out what different branding or messaging works, or figure out, kind of look into the signage, just signage, educational signage without bags and disposal. And then maybe you can afford some bags and disposal in some locations, and see if you can do the mapping of the immediate area, a quarter mile up the trailhead, and see kind of what if there are differences in doing that. So Middlesex Fells already has baseline data that they can use, so they could actually launch this pretty quickly. Blue Hills could do something like that with some planning, because they would need their citizen scientists, but my husband has already volunteered, so you have at least one. Actually, he really likes the idea of the yellow flags. The yellow flag intervention was very, very successful in Kirkland. And you can just imagine what it would be like to see a field of yellow flags and want to know, what are those yellow flags? What do they mean? So it has curb appeal. Again, whether the flag intervention works without the disposal facilities, they didn't test that. So would a flag intervention in and of itself work? I don't know. So these are the kinds of things. I hope this has been a good basis for conversation, and I will leave you with just a few of the kind of amusing social media messages that Marin came up with to try and get people to step up and take care of their dog's waste. So I invite your questions and comments and thoughts.